In 28 years on the bench, I have learned that the most dangerous moment in any courtroom is not when someone is lying. It is when someone is telling the truth, and no one in the room is ready to hear it. The file said she was a runaway, 11 years old, found alone on a state highway at 2 in the morning, 12 kilometers from the house she was supposed to call home. The charge was straightforward. The protocol was clear. Every person in that courtroom knew exactly how the next 40 minutes were supposed to go. And then she sat down. She was wearing a coat 2 sizes too big, holding it closed with one hand because the zipper was broken. Her sneakers had tape where the sole had come apart. Her ponytail sat slightly to the left because there was no mirror and no one to help her fix it. I have seen thousands of people sit in that chair. I know within the first 30 seconds what kind of case I am dealing with. I know the difference between someone who made a mistake and someone who had no other choice. I knew, looking at her, that I was not there to judge a crime. I was there to understand a silence. 7 months of it, 2 home visits, a file that called everything satisfactory. What she told me when I finally asked the right question did not just change my ruling. It opened an investigation that uncovered 3 other names, 3 other children, 3 closed files that should never have been closed. But when she walked into my courtroom that morning, none of that had happened yet. There was just a small girl in a broken coat, pressing her hands together in her lap to keep them from shaking, and a question I hadn't asked yet. Before we begin, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. And if stories about justice, empathy, and hidden truths move you the way they move me, make sure you're subscribed. You won't want to miss what comes next. There are cases that find you before you find them. Most mornings, I arrive at the courthouse before the cleaning crew finishes. I like the silence of it, the way the hallways hold their breath before the day begins, before the weight of other people's worst moments fills the air. I have a ritual, coffee, black, from the machine on the second floor that everyone else avoids. A few minutes at the window that faces the parking lot. And then I put on the robe. 28 years on this bench have taught me that the robe doesn't make you wise. It just makes you visible. People look at you differently when you wear it. They project things onto you, authority, certainty, the comfortable fiction that someone in the room knows exactly what justice looks like. I stopped pretending to be that person a long time ago. What I do now is something simpler and considerably harder. I try to listen better than the law does. The law is not a bad thing. I want to be clear about that. It is a magnificent, imperfect, living structure built by human beings who were trying, most of them, to build something fair. But the law reads in straight lines, and human lives are not straight lines. They are tangled, doubling back on themselves, knotted in places no legislation anticipated. My job, the real job, beneath the title and the gavel and the filing numbers, is to stand in the space between what the law says and what a human being actually needs. That space is sometimes inches wide. On the morning I want to tell you about, it was the entire room. It was a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that feels like it arrived apologetically, uncertain of itself. The sky outside the high windows of courtroom 4 was the color of old dishwater. Not quite gray, not quite white, just absent. The radiator in the far corner had been making a sound for 3 weeks that maintenance kept promising to fix, a low, rhythmic ticking that I had come to think of as the room's heartbeat. The wooden benches were mostly empty, too early for the usual crowd. The fluorescent light above the defense table had a flicker that no one else seemed to notice, but that I had been watching for 40 minutes. I noticed all of this because I was not yet ready to look at what was sitting in front of me. She came in through the side door with the social worker. I heard them before I saw them, the soft, uncertain squeak of rubber soles on linoleum that hadn't been mopped quite right. And then she appeared at the edge of my peripheral vision, and I made myself finish writing the sentence I was writing before I looked up. I don't know why. Some instinct told me that looking too fast would frighten her, that she was the kind of child who had learned to read the intentions of adults in the first half-second of eye contact, and that she needed a moment to read mine without pressure. When I did look up, she was already seated. She was 11 years old, though she sat like someone who had been carrying adult weight for considerably longer. The coat was gray and enormous on her, one of those donations that arrives in a garbage bag and gets distributed without ceremony, sized for a body twice hers. The zipper was broken. She held it closed with one hand, an unconscious gesture, protective. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that sat slightly off-center, the elastic too loose, the whole thing listing to the left the way a ponytail looks when there is no mirror and no one to help. Her sneakers were white once. The left sole had begun to separate from the upper, and she had pressed it back with what looked like a strip of packing tape that had since given up. She did not look around the room. She did not look at the social worker beside her, a woman named Donna Reeves, whose navy suit said competence and whose eyes said exhaustion. She did not look at the court reporter, who was already positioned at her machine, fingers hovering. She looked at her own hands, folded in her lap, and she pressed them together slowly and released them and pressed them together again. Over and over. The way you grip something when you are trying to keep it from shaking. I set down my pen. Outside, a car passed on the street below. The radiator ticked. The fluorescent light above the defense table flickered once and held. I had read her file 3 times that morning. The file on Lily Mae Porter was 11 pages long. 11 pages for 11 years of life. I have always found something unbearable about that ratio. The way a child's entire existence can be compressed into paper, into case numbers and transfer dates and behavioral assessments written by people who spent 45 minutes with her and then moved on to the next file. I read it the first time quickly, the way you read something when you are hoping you misunderstood it. I read it the second time slowly. The third time I read only the dates. 3 foster placements in 4 years. The first ended when the family relocated out of state and did not request to bring her. The second ended following what the file described as placement disruption due to behavioral incompatibility. I have seen that phrase hundreds of times. It is the system's way of saying, this child was too much trouble, and no one wanted to sort out whose fault that was. The third placement, the one she ran from, had been active for 7 months. The supervising caseworker had visited twice. Both visits were noted as satisfactory. I put the file down when the clerk called the room to order. The assistant district attorney was a young man I had seen in my courtroom perhaps a dozen times. He was competent and overworked, and on this particular morning, he had the look of someone who had drawn the short straw. He stood and read the charge in the flat, practiced voice of someone reciting rather than speaking. Minor female, 11 years of age, found unaccompanied on State Route 9 at approximately 2:17 in the morning, 12 kilometers from her registered placement address. Charge: endangering the welfare of a minor, specifically herself. The state was seeking a formal review of her placement status and requesting that the court consider mandatory counseling services and a supervised return to the current foster arrangement, pending further assessment. Pending further assessment. I wrote those 3 words on the notepad in front of me and underlined them twice. The social worker, Donna Reeves, submitted her report with outstanding. It was thorough, as her reports tended to be. 2 pages, single-spaced, outlining the circumstances of discovery, the condition of the child upon arrival at the county facility, the attempts made to contact the foster parent. Gerald Simmons had been reached by phone at 3:40 in the morning. He reported that he had not noticed the child was missing. He did not come to the facility that night. The file noted this without comment. I commented on it internally, in language I will not reproduce here. The public defender assigned to Lily was a woman in her late 30s, who I respected enormously, and who was visibly furious in the restrained, professional way of someone who has learned to be furious quietly. She had spoken briefly with Lily before the session, and had managed, I could tell, to communicate one essential thing to her. You don't have to say anything you don't want to say. It was the right thing to tell her. It was also, I suspected, advice that Lily had no framework for receiving. In my experience, children who have spent years in systems learn very quickly that silence is not protection, that someone always makes you speak eventually. that the only variable is whether you choose the words or someone chooses them for you. The ADA concluded his summary. He gathered his papers. He sat down. The room was quiet for a moment, that particular quiet that follows the reading of a charge, when the words are still settling, when everyone present is privately calculating the weight of what was just said against the weight of what is sitting in the room. I have learned to let that quiet breathe. Rushing past it is a mistake. The quiet is part of the process. It is the part where the human beings in the room remember that they are human beings. I looked at Lily. She was still looking at her hands. The radiator ticked. Once. Twice. I could have proceeded directly to the matter of placement review. That was, technically, the function of this hearing. The state had a protocol, and the protocol had a shape, and the shape of it on this particular Tuesday morning pointed toward a ruling that would send Lily back to a house on Millbrook Road, while investigators assembled paperwork. The protocol was not malicious. It was simply indifferent. And indifference in a courtroom is its own kind of verdict. I set down my pen. I looked at the social worker. I looked at the ADA. I looked at the public defender, who met my eyes for exactly 1 second and gave me nothing, which from her was everything. She was telling me, "This one is yours. Whatever you're going to do, do it now." I folded my hands on the bench. "Lily." She looked up, fast, startled. The reflex of someone who has learned that their name spoken by an adult in a room like this is rarely the beginning of something good. Her eyes were very green and very still, the way water is still just before something moves beneath it. "I've read the report," I said. "I've heard what the state has to say. Now I want to hear from you." I paused, let that land. Not about that night specifically, not yet. I want to start somewhere simpler. I leaned forward slightly, just enough. "Tell me about the house on Millbrook Road. Tell me what it was like to live there." She stared at me, calculating, deciding. The fluorescent light flickered above her head. And then, slowly, with the careful caution of someone removing their hand from a wound to see how bad it is, she began to speak. I listened. And what she told me changed everything about what happened next. But before I tell you what she said, I need you to understand something. I need you to understand that in 28 years, I have heard thousands of explanations. Some were lies. Some were performances. Some were the truth dressed up in language designed to make it more palatable, more sympathetic, more legally useful. After enough years, you develop a sense for the difference. Not infallible, never infallible, but present. What came out of Lily Mae Porter's mouth that morning was none of those things. It was just a child telling the truth because she had run out of reasons not to. I looked at her, this small, careful, exhausted person in her oversized coat, and I asked her the only question that ever really matters in a room like this. "Why did you leave?" She didn't answer right away. That was the first thing I noticed. Not hesitation, calculation. There is a difference, and it matters. Hesitation is uncertainty. What Lily did was something older and more deliberate. She was deciding how much of the truth was safe to give to a stranger in a robe who sat above her on a raised platform in a room full of people who had been talking about her life for the last 20 minutes without once asking her a question. She looked at her hands, then at the window, then finally at me. "He knocked on my door," she said. Her voice was small, but it was steady. The voice of someone who had rehearsed this sentence in her head many times in the dark and was now discovering what it felt like to say it out loud in the light. "He knocked on my door at night, not to tell me something, just to knock. And then he'd stand there, outside, and I could hear him breathing through the gap at the bottom." The room did not move. "How many times did this happen?" I asked. "A lot," she said. "Maybe, I don't know, a lot." "Did you ever open the door?" "No." "Why not?" She looked at me as though I had asked her why she didn't touch a hot stove, as though the answer was so obvious that the question itself was frightening. "Because," she said, "I knew what would happen if I did." I wrote nothing on my notepad. I did not look away from her. In the periphery of my vision, I was aware of Donna Reeves very carefully not moving. the way a person goes still when they understand that any motion might disturb something that needs to stay exactly where it is. The ADA had set down his pen. The court reporter's fingers were moving, capturing every word, but even she had the quality of someone trying to take up less space. "The night you left," I said, "walk me through it." She breathed in slowly. Out. He knocked 3 times. The first time I counted to 100. The second time I counted to 200. The third time, she stopped. Something moved across her face. Not tears, not yet. Something quieter and more final. The third time I knew the fourth knock wasn't going to be a knock. So I got my shoes and I got my coat and I went out the window. The window. The bathroom window. It's small, but I'm small. I dropped down into the side yard and I walked. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I wasn't going to be there when he opened the door. I sat with that for a moment. 28 years, thousands of cases. And there are still moments when the simple, unadorned truth of what one human being is capable of doing to another, particularly to a child, particularly to someone small and placed into their care by a system that visited twice in 7 months and called it satisfactory. There are still moments when that truth hits the floor of you and echoes. I looked at the public defender. She was looking at her notepad. Her jaw was set. I looked at Donna Reeves. She was looking at Lily with an expression I had not seen on her face before in all the years she had appeared in my courtroom. It was not the expression of a caseworker reviewing a file. It was the expression of a woman who understood, fully and finally, that she had missed something she should not have missed, and who was going to spend a long time carrying that. Good, she should carry it. Not as punishment, as fuel. The difference between a broken system and a functioning one is the number of people inside it who are still capable of being changed by what they witness. I turned back to Lily. "Is there anything else you want to tell me?" I asked. "Anything at all. This room right now. This is the place. Whatever you say in here stays in this record. It becomes real. Do you understand what I mean by that?" She thought about it seriously, the way children think about things when they have not yet been taught to perform thoughtfulness. "I want to go somewhere safe," she said. "I don't care where, I don't want to go back there." 6 words. I don't want to go back there. I have heard people ask for things in this courtroom their whole lives. I have heard people ask for money, for mercy, for more time, for second chances they had not earned and third chances they did not deserve. I have heard eloquent arguments from expensive attorneys and desperate pleas from people with nothing left. And I want to tell you that in all of that, in all of 28 years of people asking for things, I have never heard a request so simple and so enormous at the same time. She wasn't asking for justice. She didn't have the language for that yet. She was asking for the most basic thing a child can ask for. A place where the door stays closed because she wants it closed. I straightened in my chair. I looked at the ADA, who was already shaking his head slightly, not in disagreement, but in the way people shake their heads when they understand that the ground has shifted beneath a proceeding and there is no returning to the shape it had before. I looked at the room, and then I spoke. "Gerald Simmons will be contacted by this court within the hour. The placement at Millbrook Road is suspended effective immediately, not pending review, not subject to assessment. Immediately. The file will be referred to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. I am adding a personal notation to that referral, which I will write myself this afternoon." I paused. Lily Mae Porter is not in trouble. She was never in trouble. What she did on the night in question was not recklessness. It was not delinquency. It was a child making the only rational decision available to her in a situation that no child should have ever been placed in. This court does not punish survival. Donna Reeves had her pen in her hand and was writing. Fast, precise. The kind of writing that means things are already in motion. "Ms. Reeves," I said, "I want Lily placed in an emergency supervised shelter by this evening, not tomorrow, this evening. I want a written confirmation of placement on my desk before I leave this building today." "Yes, Your Honor." I looked at Lily one last time. She was still sitting in the same position. Same coat held closed with one hand. Same off-center ponytail. But something had changed. Something in the angle of her shoulders, something barely perceptible. Like a door swinging open so slowly that you don't notice it moving until you realize that the light in the room is different. "Lily," I said, "I need you to hear me." She looked at me. "You are safe now." 3 words. I had chosen them carefully. Not "you will be safe." Future tense, provisional, contingent on processes and paperwork and the good behavior of institutions that had already failed her once. Present tense, declarative. A statement of fact, made by the only person in the room with the authority to make it so. She pressed her lips together, and then, very quietly, she began to cry. Not the tears of a child performing sadness, not the strategic weeping I have seen deployed in this courtroom more times than I can count. These were the tears of someone who has been holding a specific weight for so long that the moment it is taken from them, the body simply does not know what to do with the absence of it. The grief of relief, the most complicated kind. The court reporter's fingers slowed. The radiator ticked. I picked up the gavel, held it for a moment, then set it down without striking. Some moments don't need a sound to mark them. They are already loud enough. I have a drawer in my desk at home, not at the courthouse, at home in the study where I go when I need to think without the weight of the robe on my shoulders. It is the bottom drawer on the left side, and it does not lock, and I have never felt the need to lock it. Inside there are letters, cards, a few photographs, a child's drawing done in crayon on a piece of paper that has been folded and unfolded so many times that the creases have gone soft, like fabric. I want to tell you about that drawing. But first I want to tell you what happened in the months between that Tuesday morning and the day it arrived. Gerald Simmons did not come to the courthouse voluntarily. He had to be contacted 3 times before his attorney returned the call. The investigation that followed was not swift, these things rarely are, but it was thorough, and what it uncovered in the months after Lily walked out of my courtroom was enough. Enough for charges. Enough for a conviction eventually on 2 counts that I will not specify here because the specifics belong to the families of the other children whose names appeared in that investigation. Children who had passed through that house on Millbrook Road before Lily, and whose cases had been closed and filed and moved on from. There were 3 of them. 3 children who had asked in their own ways and in their own languages for someone to hear what Lily finally said out loud in courtroom 4 on a gray Tuesday morning. I thought about those 3 children for a long time afterward. I still do. Donna Reeves requested a transfer to the department's oversight division 6 weeks after the hearing. I heard about it through the kind of courthouse grapevine that carries the things people are too professional to say directly. She told her supervisor apparently that she wanted to be the person who checked the cases that weren't being checked, that she wanted to be the reason a file got a 3rd visit instead of 2. I don't know if she became that person. I hope she did. I believe she tried. The ADA who read the charges that morning, the young man with the overworked eyes who had drawn the short straw, he came to see me about 4 months later. Not about a case. He knocked on the door of my chambers and stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets and said that he had been thinking about the Lily Porter case and that it had changed something in how he read files. That he had started asking different questions. That he had started reading the dates the way I had taught myself to read them, not as administrative markers, but as a map of what had been allowed to continue and for how long. I told him that was the most useful thing a prosecutor could learn to do. He nodded. He left. I never mentioned it again, and neither did he. But I watched him in my courtroom in the year that followed, and I can tell you that he asked different questions. I noticed. In this work, that is not a small thing. As for Lily, I received updates through the proper channels, which is the formal way of saying that Donna Reeves made sure I was kept informed, quietly and consistently, in the way that people inside systems sometimes bend the rules slightly, in service of something that matters more than the rule. The emergency placement held. The shelter was not perfect, no shelter is, but the staff there were attentive and the environment was stable, and Lily, according to the reports, slept through the night on the first night she was there. I read that detail in a one-line notation buried in a progress report, and I had to set the report down for a moment before I could continue reading. She slept through the night. 11 years old, sleeping through the night as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world, which it should have been, which it had apparently not been for longer than anyone had thought to ask about. She was matched with a prospective adoptive family in the spring of the following year, a couple in Ohio, a school teacher and a woman who ran a small landscaping business from their home. They had been on the approved list for 2 years. They drove 6 hours to meet her. According to the notes, they brought her a book about birds, because somewhere in the intake paperwork Lily had mentioned, in passing, that she liked birds. She had seen a cardinal through the window of the shelter and pointed at it and said it was pretty, and someone had written that down, and the family had read it. I want to pause on that. Someone wrote it down. The smallest, most human detail, a child noticing a red bird through a window, and someone thought it mattered enough to record. There are moments when the system works exactly the way it was designed to, when all of its imperfect, paper-heavy, under-resourced machinery produces something that looks, briefly, like grace. The adoption was finalized 18 months after the hearing. I know this because of the drawing. It arrived at the courthouse in a standard white envelope addressed in the careful, oversized handwriting of a child who has recently been taught that letters are things worth sending. My name was spelled correctly, which I found unexpectedly moving. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the kind with light blue lines that elementary schools stock in bulk, and on it, drawn in crayon, was a house. It was a child's house in the way children's houses always are. Square body, triangle roof, 4 windows placed symmetrically, a door in the center with a round doorknob. There was a tree to the left and what I believe was meant to be a dog to the right, though it bore only a passing resemblance to any dog I have encountered in life. There was smoke coming from the chimney, a thin, orange curl of it, careful and deliberate, the kind of detail a child adds when they want you to understand that the house is warm. Beneath the house, in the same careful handwriting as the envelope, were 2 words. I'm safe. No signature, no return address. She knew I would know. I sat at my desk for a while after I read it. The courthouse was quiet. It was late, later than I usually stay. The cleaning crew had already come and gone. The hallways were holding their breath again, the way they do before the day begins, and I thought about the ritual of it. The coffee from the machine on the 2nd floor, the window that faces the parking lot, the robe. I thought about what this work costs and what it gives back and how the balance sheet never quite resolves, how you carry the cases that broke against you for years, how the system's failures follow you home in ways you learn to live with rather than forget. And then, occasionally, in a white envelope from Ohio, something arrives that makes the ledger feel almost even. I put the drawing in the bottom drawer, with the others. I still have it. I have thought in the years since that Tuesday about what I would say if someone asked me what the Lily Porter case taught me. I have a tendency in these moments toward the philosophical, occupational hazard of too many years on the bench, but I think the truth of it is simpler than philosophy. It is this. The most important thing I did that morning was not the ruling. It was not the referral, or the suspension of placement, or the personal notation I added to the file. Those things mattered. They were necessary, but they were not the most important thing. The most important thing I did was ask a question, and then be quiet enough to hear the answer. That is the whole of it. After 28 years and thousands of cases and more mornings than I can count standing at that window with a bad cup of coffee, that is what I know. Listen better than the law does. Stand in the space between what is written and what is true. And when a child tells you she just wants somewhere safe, believe her. Move fast. Make it so. Every person who walks into a courtroom is carrying something the file doesn't mention. The file is the map. The person is the territory. Never confuse the two. If this story moved you, if Lily's courage or that drawing, or that one red cardinal through a shelter window stayed with you in any way, then I ask you to do one small thing. Subscribe to this channel, because every week there is another case, Another person standing in front of a bench with something the file doesn't mention. Another story where the law and the human being inside it pull in different directions, and someone has to stand in the space between them. Be that person, wherever you are, however you can. This court is adjourned. If this story stayed with you, if something about that gray Tuesday morning or that small girl in an oversized coat or 2 words written in crayon from Ohio is still sitting somewhere in your chest, I want you to pause for just a moment and ask yourself something honest. Has there ever been a time when you needed someone to ask the right question, and no one did? When the system around you moved forward on paperwork and protocol, while something true went unspoken, unseen, unfiled? And have you ever been the person who almost missed it, who almost walked past a detail, a silence, a strip of packing tape holding something together, and caught yourself just in time? Lily didn't need a verdict. She needed someone to be quiet enough to hear her. That is not a skill that belongs only to judges. It belongs to anyone willing to slow down long enough to ask, and then actually listen to the answer. Leave your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about compassion, about the courage it takes to tell the truth, and about the kind of justice that looks a child in the eye and says you are safe now, then subscribe to this channel. There is always another case, another person, another truth the file forgot to mention. We will be here when it arrives.